Now let's talk about the Houston Texans, a very surprising projection of 7.9 mean wins and making the playoffs 36% of the time, although they only come out 25th in total DVOA in the projections. What happened is they're lower than the Colts and the Titans, but they have an easier schedule, so it ends up bringing them almost to where the Colts and the Titans are. And I know it looks weird, but what happened is the Texans kept signing guys who just added just a little bit of improvement to their defense, like Jerry Hughes, Okoronkwo from the Rams, drafted Derek Stingley in the first round and Jalen Pitre in the second round. And so it kept adding little bits to their defense. Mike Clay from ESPN does these unit grades that are part of his projections. And he has Houston projected with the worst team in the league when you grade them unit by unit. And I feel like when you look at their defense, I don't understand how you have them as the worst team in the league. They seem so sub-mediocre, but not horrible. Like they keep adding these veterans that are like kind of reasonable, or they have added rookies at some important positions. And you're like, this team is built so that when week 12 comes along and they show the graphic that says still in the mix, that the Houston Texans will still be in the mix. It's just they're going to be 5-7.
Right. Yeah. They built this team to hopefully be average. And I think one of the other things I kind of said in the chapter, they seem like they're striving for competency because for a while there's just been incompetency from the Texans. So they want to just be competent so they can say they were competent for a year. So you look at guys like you bring in, especially, the defensive line is not going to be that bad. It's a bunch of decent players. I said Malik Collins is probably, better than the average, but you look at, they brought in Mario Addison, Jerry Hughes. You have guys that are going to be able to rush the passer. They'll be fine. They're not going to be the worst in the league at anything. I don't think, which is really their goal. And we get into the chapter, and that doesn't really help them out for 2023 and any type of core for this roster, because it's really non-existent outside of the guys who were drafted this year, and maybe you could say Davis Mills if you are really high on him. So there's really no core to build off of in future years, but this team is very well built to be okay in 2022.
That basically to me raises the larger question. What is a successful 2022 season for the Houston Texans?
I mean, honestly, I think that the most successful season for the Houston Texans in 2022 is if we're wrong and actually they suck.
Once they stop putting Davis Mills in second and long and third and long all game, he was sort of like semi-competent, but it's sort of like he may not be a complete disaster. And so the defense, we haven't projected 15th. I agree with Dan. They have a bunch of, if last year's was the team that you signed of a bunch of replacement level Madden free agents, this year they have those guys and a few guys who are better than that. So in that case, they're probably going 7-10, 6-11, and have no chance of making the playoffs, but they're not also completely awful, and they're not going to get a high enough draft pick. I mean, that looks like who Houston is going to be. And it's sort of like, do they think, is that to them success because it's executing their culture? I don't understand where they are right now and where they think they're going.
It's really hard to imagine the Texans going better than 9-8. If they win this division, I feel like they win this division because everybody goes 9-8 or worse. But as far as Davis Mills goes, I mean, like a lot of this team, hey, he's semi-competent is going to be on his tombstone. The fact is, Davis Mills was the second most effective rookie quarterback last year. He got better near the end of the year, which doesn't tend to carry over till the following year, let's be really honest, but it does sort of show some growth. And he was in a terrible situation, right? Any argument you want to make about how Trevor Lawrence looked awful because he was in an awful situation. I mean, Davis Mills' situation was almost as bad, except he had Brandon Cooks, whereas Lawrence lost his best receiver in week 4. But it's not like playing for the 2021 Houston Texans was a good situation. And yet Davis Mills looks semi-competent. At the same time, I think none of us, especially film watchers, but let's just say none of us, think that Davis Mills has a reasonable expectation of ever being a top 10 quarterback in this league.
Yeah, I think a lot of what it went going back and watching him and looking at the numbers, a lot of it was, schemed in a way where it was, again, it was okay. When you look at, I think it was, 70% of his passes were within, 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. There were a lot of, empty completions when, the Football Outsiders looks at, failed completions. He was among the highest rate of that. So there were a lot of completions that were short and accurate, and he's fairly accurate from 1 to 10. But then you go to the intermediate and deep passing, and it wasn't really there. So in that way, he was kind of a poor man's Mac Jones a little bit. So I'm not totally sure how much there's going to be an explosive element. And I find it really hard to sustain an offense if you're really only going to be living in that 1 to 10 range. And that's really the only way you're productive. That's the only way you're accurate. So I think that's kind of where the hang up long term is, where it can be fine in that area, but I don't think you can build an offense around that.
So let's say Davis Mills ends up as sort of like a below average starter. Say he's like 20th in DVOA, little functional in the Pep Hamilton offense. Texans go 6-11, 7-10, end up with a pick and end up with like the 7th or 9th pick in the draft. What do you do?
Because you try to trade up to the top.
Yeah, I think that's probably, what you should do. But that's kind of what the Texans are setting themselves up to do, right? They're not trying to organically get that top pick where they could just say, all right, we're going to take this guy. They're setting themselves up for, maybe the 6 or 7 wins where they're going to be in that place, and they have to use that extra first round pick to trade up. And that just kind of seems like, what happens if they're average? And that kind of seems like, if that's around where the projections have them here. And that's kind of, it seems like what they're setting up to do. It just, in the long term, kind of seems like it's not the greatest way to move forward into 2023, but they can say, hey, we improved in 2022. And I think this kind of just entire Texans organization feels like they need that at this point. And that's just kind of why they built it this way.
Blandness is better than what we've seen over the last year or two.
Yeah, absolutely. But also on the defensive side of the ball, they did do some interesting things. Last year they changed up a little bit. You think of Lovie Smith as the cover 2 type guy, but the second half of the season, they were running single high at one of the highest rates in the league, but that was kind of still an old football guy type thing because they were really bad against the run. So they just really wanted another guy in the box. So that's kind of why it wasn't necessarily this gives us a schematic advantage in coverage. It was, we need this extra guy in the box because we can't stop the run. So we'll see, but I'm interested to see what, if Derek Stingley does, open up some coverage things, because you would think he would, and we kind of saw on draft night, like that was said in the phone call. So that, I guess, gives you some hope, but this is also, the same coach who had Darrelle Revis out in zone coverage. So
yeah, well, that's true.
Who knows?
Now, I think that our projections have them too high, but I do think our projections are sending a message about how this team is much more mediocre than they are bad. I don't think they're going to win this division, but there is a chance that they go 9-8 and sneak away with a bad division, in which case, are they going to drink their own Kool-Aid after that and think they're a team on the rise? Or will they be smart about it and realize, first of all, that they need a quarterback, like a real quarterback, and that they need to continue to build for the future? At least it's a little bit more entertaining than last year, which was just a complete nightmare.
Yeah, and you would think, and then you kind of look at the draft, that also adds a confusing element, because they did pick up, all of those extra picks. But then in the past 2 years, they've had the 2 biggest premiums just in kind of draft value. Obviously not giving up the most picks, but it was a very expensive trade up for Nico Collins. They had a even more expensive trade up for John Mechie this year. So there's still a team that is still willing to give away a lot of draft capital to get their guys in like the second and third round. And that's not exactly what you would be wanting from a rebuilding team either. This team would be much better with, multiple third rounder or third, fourth, and fifths. That's what this team, again, should be doing, but they're still very confident in their guys, even though they're picking up some of these extra picks. They're paying a lot too. It's not like they're just moving up in the draft. They're paying more relative to the pick they're getting than just about anyone. And that was 2 years in a row.
And Nico Collins barely played as a rookie, right? They're expecting a lot more from him this year. They better be, because right now he's their 2 and Mechie is their 3. And I don't even know if Mechie's going to be healthy to start.
Right. And he's coming off the ACL. So it's maybe October if he, is back. So it's a very, again, we could just, we talked for 20 minutes and just can sum up the Texans are weird, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that kind of talks about what they have been for the past couple years. And I also kind of think describes why they're doing what they're doing, because if they're okay, like they can say that. And I think they'll, publicly put out that, look, we improved. We were an okay football team this year. And that's kind of their goal. They just don't want to look as bad as they have been in the past.